Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Dolphin Financial Radio Show. Today, we're going to be talking about retiring in Puerto Rico and paying no tax. Yes, you heard me right. We're going to talk about retiring in Puerto Rico for the tax benefits. Now, before you jump on me and say, Dan, this sounds crazy, we've done a show in the past. I'll put it up here about living abroad or retiring in Mexico to reduce your costs. And so one of the biggest costs that people face ever in life is taxes. So why not look at the tax benefit of moving to Puerto Rico? Help me talk about that. I'm going to bring in my co-host. There he is, Tony Shore. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this one.
We're going to talk about
interesting
Puerto Rico.
Yeah,
now,
this sounds great to me. I'm going to look into this.
You showed me the video, John Stossel. We saw this before it. He came out with a recent video called Tax Freedom in Puerto Rico. That's what spurred this video that we're doing now.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm a big fan of John Stossel. He's a libertarian, and he comes up with the way, I just like the way he pokes and prods, but he did a video. People, I suggest you look on there. You find it on YouTube, about the tax benefits of moving to Puerto Rico. Now, have you ever been to Puerto Rico, Tony?
I have not. I've always wanted to go. I'm fascinated by the culture and its relationship with the U.S. But I wasn't aware previously of this tax issue in Puerto Rico or the tax situation there.
Yeah, I went to Puerto Rico when I was in high school, I think.
Yeah. Really? So
yeah,
you've been there.
My parents started traveling when they were young. My dad was an English teacher, and my mom worked for the IRS.
That's why you're always talking about taxes. See, now you're burying the lead here. I don't know if our listeners understand. Now we get it all comes in.
No, my parents' big advice, I put that up here, was to travel while you're young, because when you're older, you may not have the energy or the wherewithal. Right. Or my mom since passed, but in that video they talked about it. And one of the trips they did was they went to Puerto Rico, and I was the youngest in my family, and I went with them, and I was the translator. Now they speak English in Puerto Rico, of course, but we went traveling. We rented a car, and we stayed at a little bungalow thing, and we needed to go to grocery store, and my parents didn't know a lick of Spanish, and I was taking it in high school, so theoretically I could communicate. Right. All I remember is going up to go see El Yunque, the rainforest. We were going over the mountain, and we got to the top, and the road was closed, and I was looking at the map, and I was able to communicate that the road had been closed for years, so we had to go all the way around. But anyway, so before I start, this show is for informational purposes. We're going to talk about taxes, but I do not provide tax advice. I got to make sure people realize that. Don't make any decisions about your retirement or your life or Social Security based on what we say today. But it's something to think about, right?
Right, because everybody's situation is different, but they should work with someone like yourself to help make those decisions, but you need to meet with them personally to help them and work alongside tax professionals if they're going to make tax decisions. So I know you help your clients with those things, but you can't give specific advice to listeners. That's too broad, is what you're saying, right? Yeah.
And I've had a few clients come recently and say, hey, we're thinking about retiring abroad, right? And I had not known about the benefits for Puerto Rico until now. So let's talk about some of the benefits. Puerto Rican residents, no federal income tax. So we're saying no U.S. federal income tax. That's the biggie.
Yeah,
no
that's a big
capital
one.
gains tax.
Really? Yeah. Wow.
All right. So let's dive a little deeper here, because this is interesting. So this was part of the Incentives Act signed in July 2019. I think it started in January 2020, right before the pandemic hit. The idea is the governor of Puerto Rico signed this into law to generate more people coming. And it was a bunch of stuff in there, but the idea is in this is this tax ruling that says no federal income tax, no capital gain tax. I think if you live there, you pay 4% tax on your income. So a lot less than what people pay here in the US. Now, you saw in the video that I sent from Stossel that there was a couple of billionaires that were like, I'm moving to Puerto Rico for the sole purpose of not paying taxes. We'll get to that. So you don't pay capital gains, no income tax on interest and dividends from Puerto Rican sources, and no expatriation tax, which happens when people renounce their citizenship or go elsewhere in the U.S. So you don't have to renounce citizenship in Puerto Rico because it's a U.S. territory.
Handy.
Right? So it's not like you have to upend your life and declare the U.S., I think you were one of the people that said you were going to leave the U.S. when the Clinton-Trump thing was going on.
No, I'm not one of those people where, hey, my guy didn't get in. I'm leaving this country. It's going to HE double hockey sticks in a handbasket. I'm leaving. That's crazy, right? I mean, and you see it on both sides. I've heard it from both sides.
I know.
It's like,
I know. I'm moving, right?
Come on.
So,
and they never do. First of all, they never do. And it's not that. And like we're talking about today, it is not that easy. I'll be honest, when my wife and I first got married, this is 29 years ago. We actually thought, before we have kids, wouldn't it be neat? I'm half English, half Irish, and she likes adventure and travel, especially when we were younger and first married. We thought, let's go live in a different country and work and live in a different country for 2 years. I seriously looked into moving to England. Well, England is one of the hardest, of course, in doing this. It's like it's really not that easy. People say I'm moving to Canada. I've got news for them. Canada doesn't want you.
Especially with your checkered history, Tony.
Yeah, they don't want the border. They don't want Americans. We're not nice enough to be Canadians. So yeah, that's the problem.
Well, it's part of the US, so you don't have to give up US citizenship. But at the same time, you're giving up your right to vote, because
you have no representation.
Puerto Rico doesn't have representation like Florida
they're
does,
not a state,
right?
Yeah.
So okay, so here's the plan, Tony. You make all your money in the U.S. selling millions of records that you do.
Eventually,
then you retire, but then you take your money and then you retire in Puerto Rico, and then you sell your records, right? And then you don't pay tax, right? That's the idea. Right. So you make millions, billions, move to Puerto Rico, and then realize those gains, and then boom, tax free.
No, it doesn't. I wish it worked that way.
I don't know. Do we really wish it worked that way? I mean, because that would be crazy. But here's how it really works. You have to be a bona fide resident of Puerto Rico.
Sure.
All right. So we have this a lot in Florida. I deal with it a lot, actually. People move to say, I'm going to live in Florida. So they buy a house in Florida to claim residencies, and even though they live in New York, say, and then they say, oh, I don't have to pay New York tax. I don't have to pay the state tax because Florida doesn't have tax, right? We did a show on how, does Florida have a 0% tax? Not really. Not really. It does have a 0 state income tax, which is a lot less than other states. So people move here, but there's some rules. You can't just buy a property and say, that's my resident. You have to live here for 6 months and a day, right? Similar rules with Puerto Rico, maybe a little bit more stringent. There are 3 tests, Tony, to get this tax-free. No federal income tax, no capital gain tax. You have to have physical presence.
Oh, I have physical presence. I've been told.
All right, but that's anywhere you go. That's
okay, that's different. Yeah,
people. So, and then you got the people, your kids throwing the rose petals in front of you when you walk to different places. So having the physical presence is easy. You can buy the house and say, I'm going to stay there for 7 months, right?
Right.
Your tax home is the second test, and that is where you would declare your home for taxes. So again, you could just say, oh, I lived there for 7 months. That's my residence. But there's also the closer connection test. And I wrote some notes down on this one because I found it fascinating. There are 9 criteria for closer connection. So you say, oh, I have my house. I bought a house. Yeah, that's my residence, even though you're not living there, right? So people trying to get around the rules. Here's where they get you. Closer connection. Number 1, there's 9. Number 1, home, right? So you have your home, easy. 2, family. Where does your family live? All right, that's an interesting, right? So if you live there, but your kids are going to school in Stillwater, Minnesota,
nope.
High school and still, might, right? Personal belongings, jewelry, car, furniture, right? So you can't. They want you to live there, right? Here's a good one: social, political, cultural, religious organizations. So if you're going to church in Rhode Island every Sunday, they're going to say, if you belong, like my dad's big into some Polish American clubs up in New York. He moved to Florida. He joined the ones locally in Florida. He still has connections up there, but he also has the ones down here. So he would pass the closer connection. Now, my dad's a full-time resident in Florida, but if he was commuting and had his social networks up there, that's a tough one. Banking. Where do you do your banking? Do you own a business? Is your business in, Wyoming and you commuting every weekend? Yeah, that's not. Where's your driver's license? Where do you vote? And what is the country of residence listed on all your documentation? So those are the 9 things that talk about the closer connection. So that's where we got to realize, you're not just saying you live in Puerto Rico.
You have to live there. Yeah.
You have to live there. You have to be a resident.
Yeah.
Right. So
doesn't mean you can't spend 5 months a year in the US, but you have to live your permanent residence, and you have to do all those things in Puerto Rico.
Right. So here's the biggie. All right. So this is what's happening. And there's also some business taxation stuff, but here's what's happening. People are trying to game the system. And so we're talking about retirement, right? Which is a little different. So let's say you own a company in Florida and it's your own company and you get all this capital appreciation and then you go to retire and then sell, right? You're going to sell your company and realize the gains and make your millions then, which is what a lot of people do in this country. Do you pay taxes then? Well, capital gains are tax-free after your residency. The appreciation has to occur while you're a resident of Puerto Rico. So you can't buy Microsoft in 1980, hold it forever, move to Puerto Rico, then sell it and not pay capital gains tax. Now, keeping in mind, capital gains tax in the U.S. is pretty low. 0%, for a couple up to like, I think 60 or 80,000. So we're talking the big capital gains here, but you can't just move to Puerto Rico and then sell all your stock and then realize the gain, sell your company, realize the gain, tax-free, right? So
they're trying to keep it from being a tax haven, but yet giving tax benefits. But we're just talking about, the Elon Musks of the world can't game it, or
the fund managers, the wealthy, that if you own a small business and sell it.
But for our listeners who want to retire somewhere and not have to pay taxes, it is advantageous. I mean, there are still advantages to this.
Right. So if you were to retire and then you paid your taxes, right? You retired, you sold your business, you got to pay the tax, right? So you do that, then you move to Puerto Rico, then you invest. And now you're investing your funds, right? Because you sold the business, they give you in cash. And before you start investing that for the future to pay dividends or to appreciate, you move to Puerto Rico, you retire, call it your home, make it your home, and truly do, right? Then you could start getting 0% tax on that capital gains, right? Then you don't pay tax on federal income tax on Puerto Rican sources. Now, here's the big one. What's the biggest source of income for people that are retiring in this country?
Social Security is one of the biggest.
It's a U.S. source. Oh. It's a U.S. source. So you still have to pay U.S. taxes on it. Just because you're a Puerto Rican resident, you don't pay income tax on Puerto Rican income. But it's a U.S. income. Now, so people that live in Puerto Rico that are putting into Social Security, people in Puerto Rico put into Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and unemployment. So that FICA, that comes out of their paycheck. So it's not like you can move to Puerto Rico and not pay those taxes. You're still putting into the system. So when you get the income and you're a Puerto Rican resident, so, all right, I retired, I moved to Puerto Rico, I'm full resident, I'm embracing this. This is where I want to live. You know, maybe your grandparents are from Puerto Rico and now you're moving back, right? You can't be a government employee, by the way. That's one of them. You can't do this and be a government employee. You still have to pay tax on your income. So, but you moved there, but you're getting Social Security. You have to pay tax on Social Security. You still have to file a federal income tax. You don't, you know, if you don't have any U.S. income, then you don't have to file a federal income tax if you're living in Puerto Rico. So that's why you don't pay tax. But Social Security is considered federal income from a U.S. source. But here's the catch, Tony, and this gets people on Social Security a lot. Is okay, Dan, I don't want to pay tax on my Social Security. How do they calculate it? And up to 85% is taxable. What they do is they consider all of your income sources. And you could say, and a lot of people, I use the example, I have municipal bonds. Municipal bonds are tax-free. So all of my income is tax-free municipal bond income. I shouldn't have to count that as income to determine whether or not Social Security is taxed. The government says, no, we consider your taxes or your income in the U.S. and all excluded tax.
Yeah.
Which means municipal bond income is excluded. You don't pay tax on that, but it's considered income to determine what your Social Security is taxed. So getting back to this scenario, you retire, you live in Puerto Rico, you have $150,000 of capital gains that you made this year. Haha, I'm a Puerto Rican resident. I don't pay tax on that. They appreciated while I was a resident. The government says, that's fine. By the way, your Social Security is taxed. Why? Because we include that capital gains income from the excluded source from Puerto Rico, goes in the formula, boom, 85% of your Social Security benefits.
Just like it would if you lived here.
Yes.
They take that into account. Yeah.
Right. Even if you had, right. You can't hide income. No, you don't pay tax on that income, but that income is in the Social Security formula. So you can't get away from paying taxes on your Social Security income by getting money from abroad. The government of the U.S. says, no, we know what you're doing. You owe us taxes on Social Security. And we did show on, is taxation on Social Security a double tax? And we made the case, or I made the case, that no, it's not. So you can watch that show if you're, but again,
it still doesn't seem fair, but it's not necessarily a double tax, but it doesn't seem right that they tax it. And they didn't up to a point.
Right. They didn't. That's the key. They didn't up to a point.
They started in the 80s. It was
such a good benefit. They're like, yeah, we can't do that. But for people that are thinking of retiring to out of the country or Mexico to reduce costs, consider Puerto Rico. Now, there's going to be pushback from Puerto Rican residents or people from Puerto Rico that live in the U.S. to say, oh, all the wealthy, rich people are going to move to Puerto Rico and they're going to become taking over and throw their money around, and that's bad for Puerto Rico. But in John Stossel's video, he made the point that, hey, they're taking their money and they're reinvesting it in Puerto Rico if they follow the rules. Now, we don't like the rule breakers, the people that are trying to, I'm going to park a yacht off the coast of Puerto Rico to call that my home. No, that doesn't count. So the IRS will crack down on people. But for those that are considering retirement outside the U.S. in a tropical location, hey, Puerto Rico is a short flight. It's a U.S. territory. You got all the protections of that. You got a tax incentive. The government of Puerto Rico is trying to get people to do this. But if you're going to do it, don't do it for the tax benefit. I mean, yeah, that's part of it, but do it because you want to live in Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole point of it.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. That's the key right there.
So it's a good way to avoid taxes, but that's not why you retire to Puerto Rico. You retire to Puerto Rico because you want to, right?
Right.
That's the key.
Yeah, and I've heard great things. I mean, there's good and bad about every place and every country and every area, but Puerto Rico has some advantages because it still is a U.S. territory, even though it's not a state. And the people that I know that are from there and have seen interviews with and everything I've read, it's a great place to at least visit, and there are good people there. I mean, the people are nice. I think, it's worth maybe for some people looking into.
I'm pretty sure Justice Sotomayor is from Puerto Rico, I think.
I think so too.
Yeah. I know because there was some recent legislation or some court rulings, Supreme Court rulings, that don't allow Puerto Rican residents to get all the benefits of U.S. citizens. And I think it was Social Security disability, actually. And Sotomayor was the only dissent. So it's not all rainbows and ponies to live in Puerto Rico. You don't get a lot of the benefits that U.S. citizens do.
Sure.
So you got to be careful about that. It's not, it's not just like moving. And as an example, Tony, like you've talked in the past about you live in Minnesota, I'm going to retire in Florida. And you're not doing it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you want to go to Key West, not because of the 0% tax compared to Minnesota. You're definitely going to benefit tax-wise by moving from Minnesota to Florida.
Sure.
But you would do it because you want to live in Key West.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And
I would love to live in Key West. Yeah.
Hey,
I'm waiting for you to buy me a place down there. You need to buy a place down there, Dan, and then let me stay there at least part of the year.
Yeah, right. I need to
hopefully during the winter months.
I need to buy a place down there and then sell it for double. Move to Puerto Rico, then sell it for double.
See, that's why I like how you think. Yeah, exactly.
So add Puerto Rico to your list of places to consider retirement, Tony. I think that's going to be the lesson here. This is there's for people to consider.
Yeah, there's a cheap cost of living in general, and there's beautiful landscape, tropical climate. I think that's why people do this. They retire in Puerto Rico, so it's one option. And the tax situation, I'm glad you laid it out for us because there are requirements, though, and I'm glad you talked about those. Yeah,
right. Yeah, because I could just see someone saying, "Oh, I'm going to sell my business, but I'm going to move to Puerto Rico first, and then wait a day." Do I have to wait a day or a week before I sell it? No, you have to. I think it's 19 years or 20 years that once you're there, then you pay a 5% capital gains tax on stuff you've bought when you were in the U.S.
Sure.
So there is a way to not grandfather, but to what's the word I'm thinking of? Vest your tax. Your taxes go down over time. But the whole idea is you're a resident of Puerto Rico. So again, sounds good. It's exciting to hear. It's a headline. Oh, zero taxes in Puerto Rico. But when you start looking into it, no, that's not what it's all about. It's about moving to Puerto Rico. So again, not a tax advice. Don't do anything crazy. Don't move to Puerto Rico because I said that you can pay no taxes. Remember, seek professional guidance before doing anything.
Yeah.
And and next time we come up, who knows, maybe next show or down the road we'll come up with another country or another territory. I wonder if it's the same for Guam or whatever. So we'll come up with it. But thanks for a good show, Tony. And listeners, we'll catch you next week. Oh, before I do that, Tony, I want to say I went to Nashville for a family vacation, or I went to Tennessee,
Vegas.
Kentucky.
Yes, you did.
Kentucky and Tennessee for a family vacation. And I'll tell you, maybe we'll do a show on what I learned in Mammoth Caves. That was a good one.
Oh, I want to hear. Let's talk about that next episode.
Let's
talk about your trip. You did some interesting things in your trip. We need to talk about that next episode.
I will. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
All matters discussed in today's show are for informational purposes only.
This show is not investment advice.
Dan Riddle nor Dolphin Financial Group are affiliated or endorsed by any government agency.
Investment advisory services are offered through Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc., a registered investment advisor in the state of Florida.
Insurance products and services are offered through Dolphin Insurance, Inc.
Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc. and Dolphin Insurance, Inc. are affiliated companies doing businesses as Dolphin Financial Group.
You should talk to someone at Dolphin Financial Group before implementing any of these strategies or ideas.